All right, our last speaker in the session is Kate Crawford. Professor Crawford is a leading scholar of the impacts of AI. She's a professor at USC, senior principal researcher at MSR, and the inaugural visiting chair of AI and Justice at the École Normale Supérieure. She founded multiple research centers around the world and leads the international research lab called Knowing Machines. Her award-winning book, Atlas of AI, won 3 international prizes and was named Best Book of the Year by the Financial Times and New Scientist. She is named on the Time 100 list as one of the most influential people on AI. Please join me in welcoming Kate Crawford.
Great. Hi, everybody. Can I just start by saying it has been so wonderful to see so many of you here over the last couple of days across really different research communities. I think it's one of the things that's incredibly special about this event already. So I also want to start with a very particular thanks to our amazing organizers, to Stuart Russell, but also Laurie and Mark and Julia for pulling together this extraordinary event so quickly. Can we have a round of applause for them? So my name's Kate Crawford, and I research the social, political, and environmental impacts of artificial intelligence. And what I want to do today is, well, first of all, drop that. But secondly, talk to you a little bit about how I see these domains being interconnected in terms of the challenges that we face in AI right now. So, of course, we all know we've seen extraordinary leaps in AI in just the last 2 years. But the field has never moved faster, nor has it had more capital or political power. But the US has also seen an extraordinary stripping away of the few protections and regulations that we've had for AI safety and ethics. And that means that these fields are more important than ever. But we have to contend with this centralization of power that's going on right now. And I was delighted to hear Joseph Stiglitz really center us on those questions this morning. So this first IASEAI conference, I think, has been critical, not just for bringing us together, but also for finding common ground in the somewhat disparate AI ethics and AI safety communities. At the highest level, we might want to say that these communities have now developed something like a shared agenda. We could say that we don't want AI, ideally, to cause harm to people or the planet, as Max was just saying, now or in the future. But today, I want to suggest that sustainability is a core part of this shared agenda. It bridges both AI safety and AI ethics, because the climate crisis is both a near-term threat and a long-term existential risk to human life as we know it. So, before I start, now, some of you might be thinking, why do we have to think about sustainability and AI safety and ethics? Isn't that just a completely different area? Well, I want to start with some facts today, because very sadly, for those of us who currently live in the United States, there has been a massive spike in misinformation about climate change, even as the catastrophic fires were spreading across Los Angeles. So let's start with the scientific consensus. The IPCC states that we have fewer than 10 years to decarbonize enough to keep global warming below 2 degrees. 2024 was the hottest year of the hottest decade ever recorded, while global CO2 is at the highest it's been in millennia. Meanwhile, data centers are powering AI in such a way that they're creating a bigger carbon footprint than the entire airline industry. So the primary task that we all face is, in fact, to lower emissions and improve sustainability. But in fact, the AI sector has been going in the opposite direction. It is set to double its emissions in 2 years. The International Energy Agency says that AI data centers will be using as much energy as Japan by next year. And this is one of the major downsides of AI hyperscaling. The drive to make ever bigger models has brought with it a dramatic increase in energy, carbon emissions, and many hidden environmental costs. But you can see where I'm going here, because in the last 2 weeks, we all saw something remarkable happen. DeepSeek's R1 model came out and was celebrated for its efficiency and reduced costs. But what received far less attention was its energy consumption. According to some reports, it used 18 times less energy than its US competitors. Rather than simply prioritizing more scale, more compute, more energy-intensive models, DeepSeek R1 seems to point to an alternative path that uses less while achieving equivalent or better results. Then just last week, AI researchers at Stanford and UW trained an AI reasoning model for less than $50. And not to leave out Berkeley, because researchers there just released Tiny Zero for around $30. So that means in a week, the upfront cost of training an AI model has gone from $100 million, which was OpenAI's cost, to $5 million to $30. So I think this all further challenges the assumption that AI has to be more resource intensive. So we've solved AI carbon footprint, right? This problem has gone away. Well, not quite, because increased AI efficiency is not the whole story. For example, as of last week, the DeepSeek app has been downloaded over 16 million times. While the energy to train that model was, yes, absolutely much less than what has become industry standard, those Chinese data centers that are serving millions of new users, well, those kilowatt hours are not being accounted for. So how should we think about AI and climate? Well, I'm going to start today by outlining two views on AI's climate impacts. On one side, we have advocates arguing that AI will ultimately be a net positive. So AI's growing footprint is justified by its future potential to drive sustainable breakthroughs. On the other side, researchers are pointing to the soaring resource demands of AI systems and climate impacts and asking if the positive contributions will be enough. Can they actually outweigh the costs? So the headlines are suggesting that we face a pretty stark choice. AI will either solve the climate crisis, or AI is going to make it a lot worse. So I want to start by looking at the evidence we have, in particular for AI's direct impacts on the environment, beginning with the negative, and then we'll move to the positive. Because in the last 2 years, since ChatGPT was released, we've seen strong evidence of increased mineral extraction, energy consumption, and water use across the sector, as well as increased greenhouse gas emissions and e-waste. So this is the Salar de Atacama. It's the largest salt flat in Chile, and I had the great privilege of visiting last year to meet with activists who are protesting lithium extraction. In this stunning desert is the richest site of lithium in the world, and it's at the heart of an ongoing political struggle due to the demands coming from the tech sector. Now, lithium is essential for GPUs and phones and electric cars. In fact, every device that you're holding right now has lithium in it. Elon Musk calls lithium the new oil, and of course we all know why. Because Tesla is estimated to be using half of the planet's total reserves. And we know that those reserves are quite limited. A study by the University of Augsburg predicted that we could be facing critical shortages of lithium by 2040, unless we start to have better recycling practices. And frankly, we're quite a long way from that. But this is just one story of the global Cold War that is happening right now over minerals. In December, China announced that it will ban the export of several very important rare earth minerals to the United States. These are minerals that are essential to building semiconductors. Now, this, of course, was a retaliation against the US, which restricted sales of AI chips to China. So now we're seeing a push to extract as much mineral capacity as possible from the global south, despite the quite extraordinary environmental damage. But if minerals are the backbone of AI. Energy is its lifeblood. According to the International Energy Agency, a generative AI prompt uses somewhere between 10 to 15 times more energy than a typical internet search query. That number goes up significantly if your prompt is generating an image or a video. And now, according to Deloitte's recent AI energy report, data centers are using around 6% of all US electricity, and we've already passed that point in China. And all AI demand is now prolonging the life of coal-fired plants around the world. So what we're starting to see is that these demands are pushing the limits of what the electrical grid can actually do. So tech companies, as we know, are now driving a resurgence of nuclear power. Another way to think of this is that AI companies are rapidly becoming energy infrastructure companies. And it's not all about energy. Hyperscaled data centers need enormous amounts of water to cool those heat-producing GPUs. Now, a single data center uses around 5 million gallons of water a day. This image, in fact, comes from Google's data center in Oregon. And after a lawsuit from local residents, it was revealed that this center was using about a third of the district's total drinking water. And worse, this area of Oregon is actually in a multi-year drought. But it's not just Google, of course. We're talking about all of the major tech companies who are training large AI models. They're reporting around a 30% increase in their water consumption just in the last year. And a paper from UC Riverside researchers has shown that every time you have an exchange with ChatGPT, somewhere between 10 to 50 responses, is the equivalent of pouring a half litre of fresh water on the ground. They now say that the new models consume much more. And where does it all end up? Well, in places like this, e-waste tips in Ghana and Pakistan in particular. We have an overwhelming 62 million tons of e-waste annually. It's now the fastest growing form of waste on the planet. So all of these dramatic forms of climate harm in the last 5 years are not mere footnotes in AI's story. Hopefully, if there's one thing that you can take from today is to know that these results are actually core to the very approach of hyperscaling as a methodology. So in summary, the direct effect of AI has been the creation of a planetary infrastructure that is directly competing with humans for basic resources like water, energy, and land. And it's pushing the limits of a planet that's already in a climate crisis. But what we don't know is exactly how far those limits are being pushed or how long we have, because so much of the relevant data, frustratingly, is being kept as corporate trade secrets. So now let's think about what some of the potential climate impacts might be on the positive side. These are the things that we might get if AI systems are actually constrained and don't become AGI, as Max just reminded us. Now, the first one is that obviously AI can have climate-positive impacts on the energy transition. This can include things like making renewable grids more efficient, enhancing hardware efficiency, possibly also enhancing how we extract minerals more efficiently, and accelerating breakthroughs in alternative sources like wind and solar. But a big area of focus, of course, is AI's climate modeling, such as satellite analysis of deforestation, coral reefs, and improved weather forecasting. That actually really makes a difference when it comes to all of those renewable energy grid operators trying to figure out how to load balance from solar and wind turbines. So indeed, I have to say these are all exciting. We're not there yet, but it certainly shows that there is a potential beneficial path. Now there are some more speculative approaches going around, including using AI to accelerate materials science for tasks like capturing carbon pollution from the air or predicting how to do solar engineering by spraying particles into the sky to reflect sunlight back and cool the Earth. Between us, I have to say that some of these ideas make me quite nervous because I'm not sure I even trust people to do that, let alone AI, but we'll see. Yet again, you're going to notice that there is a theme here. These ideas are early stage, and we don't have much evidence to go on yet. But perhaps the most common viewpoint from those who think AI is going to be fine for the environment or not as bad as it seems is that AI's direct environmental toll will simply decline as hardware, software, and algorithms become more efficient. This is called the optimization thesis. And what I'm going to show you today is why this is overlooking some important factors. And here I'm sharing new findings from a paper that came out just last week on efficiency gains and rebound effects. And I want to thank my fantastic co-authors, Sasha Lucione and Emma Strubel. So when we looked at the research, we saw two big problems. On one side, claims about AI's climate-saving potential are still nascent or hypothetical because there's just not enough evidence that AI's benefits will offset its own carbon emissions. And then it comes to AI's negative climate impacts. And we're actually seeing conflicting estimations and conflicting data because tech companies are simply not disclosing sufficiently granular details. The best numbers are coming from the IEA, electrical grid operators, and from individual districts who are reporting on water and energy use. But let's be clear, everyone agrees that AI's resource demands are skyrocketing, but nobody knows exactly how bad it is. So I want to suggest that that is a major problem for us, not just as a field, but obviously as people who are living on Earth. So we obviously need more research quickly and much more industry transparency. So now let's consider AI's indirect impacts. Now, this is very rarely talked about because it's much harder to measure, but I'd like to suggest that it could be just as crucial. When I was researching my book Atlas of AI, I would go to rare earth and lithium mines in person to actually talk to people there about their extraction rates, to see the impacts, to go to data centers in deserts, to Amazon fulfillment warehouses, to see these things with my own eyes. But seeing indirect effects is actually much harder, but in many ways can be just as consequential over time. But to begin to understand them, we need to go back to this guy, the engineer and economist William Stanley Jevons. Now, he was studying coal usage in the mid-19th century. At that time, there was growing concern about how much coal was being rapidly pulled out of the earth. And in his book, The Coal Question, back in 1865, he observed that steam engines, as they became more fuel efficient, they didn't actually reduce coal consumption at all. In fact, they made coal-powered energy cheaper and more accessible, which led to higher overall use. This came to be known as Jevons paradox, where increases in efficiency end up driving increased consumption. And this has been used in many studies, including that classic question, why is it that when we build more highways, we actually end up with greater traffic congestion? Or, of course, what happens when we see we've got increased home heating efficiency, yet people are building larger homes and increasing the amount of heat that they're using? This phenomenon also applies to AI. If we only focus on making AI models more efficient, say using fewer kilowatt hours to train a large model, then companies might decide to train more frequently. More AI models will be released, and that means more data centers, more users, and effectively you've undone all of those energy savings that you've created. That is Jevons paradox in action. By optimizing models alone, we're not actually solving the problems. We risk, in fact, escalating resource depletion instead of reducing it, if we don't look at the larger picture. And in fact, indirect effects are all around us. For example, there are so-called substitution effects that occur if you swap one technology for another. For example, using an energy-intensive AI agent instead of a traditional web search, or asking GPT to come up with some words for you like a thesaurus instead of, say, opening one on your desktop. And of course, there are space rebound effects too. Think here of Amazon same-day delivery. So instead of shopping in person, going down to the store, you've now increased freight miles for small goods every time you order something like a razor or a pack of batteries. And now we have AI recommendations honing in your preferences and encouraging more of those frequent and sometimes even superfluous purchases, which then, of course, creates more cardboard waste, more returned items, and ultimately more landfill. Now, this year, we can expect AI-driven advertising inside personal agents. What that means is that you'll have so-called trusted AI agents with the power to recommend more goods and even automate your purchases, thereby driving up consumption and potentially manipulating you to buy one product over another. In short, in this room, we are all likely underestimating the full impacts of AI if we only look at the obvious inputs and outputs, because there are ripple effects that are shifting behavioral patterns and social structures, and that will spread far further than the direct impacts that we might consider, like kilowatt hours or litres of water per training run. So what comes next? If energy efficient models aren't going to solve things, then what will? Well, I think there are some important paths forward, so I'm going to take us there. In the AI safety and ethics fields, although we have many, many differences, I think we're pretty excellent at identifying and addressing serious risks. And I think it's the right time now to include climate harms among the risks of AI, to see where AI ethics, safety, and sustainability are connected. And I don't know about you, but I loved that Meg Mitchell created a hilarious new conference name in her talk yesterday, so I thought I would follow suit and suggest this: the International Association for Safe and Ethical and Sustainable AI. So that gives us IASEAI. Doesn't really quite work. But it might also point us to a bigger problem, which is whether hyperscaled AI can ever be truly sustainable, always safe, or completely ethical. So maybe a better title is the International Association for As Safe, Ethical, and Sustainable as Possible AI, or IASEAI. I mean, kind of more catchy in a way. Caesar pie kind of makes me think of pizza. Who knows? Kind of sounds like an evolved Pokemon. But the point remains. I know that these systems are going to come with ongoing risks, as do you. But we're all here in this room because we believe that changes have to be made, and soon. So why don't we end on what is to be done? Because first I want to remind you that the people in this room have power. You can actually push for real changes. We have people from industry, academia, and government. We have regulators in this room. And that means there's actual specific steps that we can start to take. Now, researchers like myself are struggling to get straight answers out of the tech sector, and in terms of climate-relevant data, we're basically stitching together environmental reports from energy and water utilities and local municipalities. But we just don't have enough time to be running off ballpark figures and running models to try and get good answers. We need a full accounting of AI's resource demands in order to respond appropriately. So imagine if every AI company reported detailed data on its energy sources and emissions and the full life cycle of its hardware. Those of us who are researchers in the room, we can also start to do this with the models we train. You can actually start to reveal kilowatt hours. Ultimately, these shouldn't be corporate secrets when it affects the livability of our planet. And that's the level of transparency we're going to need if we are going to empower these policymakers, researchers, and the public, so that collectively we can make sure that companies are accountable to do better and not go backwards. Second, if AI is going to be such a ubiquitous part of everyday life, it needs to have standardized energy reporting, just like our cars and our washing machines. It needs safety checks, like our cars and our planes. And it needs regulations, like our food and our medicines. This is basic, folks, and it is not a lot to ask for a technology that is affecting the lives of billions. Now, the insight provided by Jevons paradox, that the gains in efficiency may inadvertently spur additional demand, is not a cause for despair or for resignation. It should in fact serve as an impetus for rethinking our approaches to AI, and a reminder that technological advancements alone are insufficient unless they account for human behavior, market logics, and political power. Which brings me to the core unspoken issue of this conference, AI and power. And here I mean it not in terms of energy, but in terms of political power. Because the concentration of wealth and political access into the hands of a few tech leaders is now a major global concern. The billionaires who currently dominate the AI market in the US were all lined up at President Trump's inauguration. And Elon Musk has the keys now to the most sensitive data sets in the United States and is actively reshaping the government as we speak. Now, I'm sure I didn't vote for him. Anybody else here? Oh, that's right, yes, because he's completely unelected. So the wealthiest man on the planet now has seemingly unconstrained and unchecked power in one of the most powerful administrations in the world. At the same time, President Trump has removed the few AI safety rails that we had, and of course, the vast majority of environmental protections. This dismantling of so much progress that we have made in the AI safety and ethics fields, and in AI regulation, might I point out, that's progress from people like Alondra Nelson and so many others in the White House. This has actually been at the heart of so many of the conversations at this conference. In our breaks and over drinks last night, many of us were talking about what are we actually going to do to process all of this. Well, one thing that helps me to reflect on how we get through times like this is to remember the words of the great political theorist Frederick Jameson, rest in peace, who wrote the following simple maxim: always historicize. It's easy to lose sight of the long-term view. There's always such a whirlwind of new AI models and, of course, right now, political horrors that I know many of us are feeling pretty overwhelmed. But a longer historical perspective actually shows us how this moment is ringing with the echoes of prior technological shifts that were part of significant social and ecological transformation. Now, recently I've been doing a lot of work on the histories of power and technology over the past 500 years, and studying how historical empires use technology to centralize power. We can see those same strategies being echoed in the technology industry today. And it can also help us to remember how empires end. Change happens not from the top, but with movements that are shaped from the ground up. This underscores the many positive strategies being pursued by people in this room. Maria Ressa talked about the use of social protest. Divya Siddharth talked about alternative forms of deliberation, and Meg Mitchell mentioned the limits of AI efficiency and the so-called bigger is better hyperscale thinking. And we've had multiple talks on regulation too. Of course, here in the EU, the AI Act was the first to define so-called high-risk systems and apply real penalties. Under Article 9 of the Act, AI providers have to implement a risk management framework, and the EU AI Office could potentially designate climate risks as being among the factors that they have to address. And on a final note, I'll say that I think multilateral cooperation is going to be paramount here. This is how we are going to set expectations about how a more safe, ethical, and sustainable AI is essential for the ongoing future of people and the planet. So in closing, we all know we're at a critical juncture. The choices that we make in the AI field in the next few years are going to reverberate for generations. AI safety, AI ethics, and sustainability actually have much in common. We are jointly concerned about the life-endangering risks that have never been more urgent. Because as AI systems are playing a bigger role on this planet, we're going to need to ensure that it's a place we'd like to live. Thanks so much.